Welcome to Sleepy Lore. Tonight we follow the life of Heracles, the greatest hero of the ancient Greek world, a man born between two realms, who carried the weight of gods and grief in equal measure. His story is not simply one of strength. It is a story of what happens after the worst thing, of how a person continues to move through a world that has shattered around them. Allow yourself to settle in. Breathe slowly, and let the story carry you. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs to those who are born between worlds. Heracles came into existence that way, suspended between the divine and the human, belonging fully to neither. His mother was Alcmene, a mortal woman of Thebes, graceful and wise, descended from Perseus himself. His father was Zeus, the king of all gods, who had taken the form of her husband Amphitryon and visited her in the long Boeotian night, a deception as old as longing itself, as old as the hunger that gods feel when they look down from their high, cold thrones and reach once more toward the warm and fleeting world below. Alcmene did not choose this. She loved her husband. She raised the child who arrived with impossible strength already in his small hands, and she must have known, even then, that this child was not entirely hers to keep. And Hera knew it too. There is something worth sitting with here at the beginning. The idea that before Heracles had done anything at all, before he had lifted a single stone or spoken a single word, he had already been made the target of a goddess's wrath. Hera, queen of Olympus, wife of Zeus, had suffered this humiliation before. Her husband's wandering, his brief and burning loves, the children who arrived bearing divine blood as evidence of what she could not prevent. She had learned to turn her pain into power, and the power she reached for most often was punishment. Not of Zeus, he was beyond her reach in that way, but of the children, always of the children. She delayed the birth of Heracles, working her divine influence on the threads of fate so that another child, Eurystheus, weaker and fearful, would be born first and would hold dominion over the hero. And then, when Heracles was still an infant, still a creature of milk and sleep and small curling fingers, she sent two serpents into his cradle. They came in the night, dark and thick-bodied, coiling through the darkness of the nursery with a silence that belonged to older things than gods. His twin brother Iphicles, entirely mortal, woke screaming. But Heracles reached up from the bedclothes with his soft infant hands, wrapped them around the serpents' necks, and held on until they stilled. They found him that way in the morning. Two dead serpents, one sleeping child. You might think this story is about power, but there's something else at work in that image. Something lonelier than power. An infant, alone in the dark, confronted by something that wanted him dead before he even knew what death was, before he had words for fear. He did not choose to survive. He simply could not stop himself from surviving. There is a difference, and it matters for everything that comes after. He grew, as those touched by gods always grow, faster, larger, brighter, and more terrible than those around him. He studied music under Linus and killed the man in a moment of rage when he was struck. He trained in warfare and wrestling and the arts of the hero. He married Megara, daughter of the king of Thebes, and for a time, for one shining, fragile time, he had a life that resembled peace. They had children together. The house would have been full of ordinary things, the sound of small feet, the smell of bread, evening light coming through an open door, and then Hera struck. The Greeks did not always agree on the details of the madness, but they agreed on this. It came from outside him. It came from the goddess, poured into his mind like a dark wine, dissolving everything that knew itself from everything that didn't. He lost the boundary between what was real and what was not. He lost, for a terrible, irreversible span of moments, himself. When the madness cleared, Megara and their children were gone. He had killed them. We do not have language for what came after. The Greeks understood this. They gave him no speech in that moment, no aria of grief. There are things that language refuses to carry. The shock that does not feel like shock because it is too large to be processed as shock, only as a kind of silence, a white space where the world used to be. He had been born to survive impossible things, and now he had to survive this. This is the part of the story that most retellings rush through, eager to get to the labors, to the monsters, to the action. But it is worth staying here for a moment, sitting in the rubble of it. The hero, the strongest man in the world, on his knees in his own house, in the wreckage of the life he had made. Unable to fix it, unable to undo it, unable even to be angry in the right direction, because the anger had no proper target that he could reach. This is the grief that has no name. This is where the real story begins. He went to Delphi. This was what people did when they could not find their way, when the path had collapsed entirely and the way forward was invisible. They went to the oracle. They asked the gods what to do with the broken thing their life had become. The oracle at Delphi sat above a fissure in the earth, where vapors rose from somewhere deep and old, and she spoke in riddles that were not riddles at all once you understood them. She told Heracles to go to Tiryns, to serve King Eurystheus, the very man whose birth had been accelerated by Hera's manipulation, who had taken the precedence that fate had intended for Heracles. He was to serve this smaller, frightened man for 12 years. He was to complete whatever labors Eurystheus assigned. In exchange, in return for this decade-long penance, he would achieve something he did not know he needed. Not absolution, not forgiveness, something harder and more real, the path to becoming what he was always meant to be. He could have refused. The oracle was not a prison door, but Heracles went. He shouldered what was placed on him, and he went. This is worth noticing, not because obedience is a virtue in itself, but because of what the choice reveals. A man who had lost everything, who had been the instrument of his own greatest loss, could have simply stopped, could have sat down in the ruins and refused to move. Instead, he walked towards something. He allowed the impossible task to become the direction. Grief, when it is very large, can paradoxically become a kind of anchor, not to the past alone, but to a reason to continue moving. The labors were not punishment, whatever they looked like from the outside. They were the shape that his grief was given. They were the form his continuation took. The first labor was the Nemean Lion. There is a village called Nemea, and it lay under the shadow of a beast unlike any ordinary animal, a lion whose hide was impervious to every weapon forged by human hands. Swords could not cut it, arrows fell away from it, spears shattered against the impossible density of its skin. It had been ravaging the countryside, and the people lived in fear the way that people live when something large and remorseless has entered their world and will not leave. Heracles arrived with arrows and found them useless. He tried his great club and found the creature merely shook off the blow. He stood in the landscape of a problem that had no ordinary solution. And this moment of confronting what cannot be defeated by the methods you have brought is the first real labor before any fight begins. He tracked the lion into its cave. He blocked one entrance and went in through the other. In the darkness, in the close and terrible space where the beast lived, he closed his hands around its throat. Those same hands that had held the serpents when he was a child, that had learned from the beginning that sometimes the only tool you have is yourself. And he held on. Afterward, he had to skin it. No blade could cut that hide. and so he used the lion's own claws, the only thing sharp enough, to open the skin and peel it from the body. He wore it for the rest of his life, the head over his own head, like a crown, the impervious hide over his shoulders, like armor against the world. There is something quiet and significant in that image. He had been sent to destroy something invulnerable, and what he took away from it was its greatest quality, the quality that made it dangerous, and wore it as protection. He turned the threat into a shield. He carried the proof of the impossible thing he had survived, and it softened every blow that came after. The fifth labor was not about a monster at all. Eurystheus, who was small in ways that had nothing to do with his body, assigned Heracles to clean the Augean Stables. King Augeas of Elis kept 3,000 cattle, and their stables had not been cleaned in 30 years. The accumulation was, there is no other word, vast. Centuries of neglect compressed into a single, overwhelming physical reality. This was designed to humiliate, to take the greatest hero in the world and bury him in filth, to make him small. There was no monster to overcome, no danger to endure, only degradation, and the slow, grinding indignity of impossible work. Heracles looked at the stables, and then he looked at the landscape. He redirected 2 rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, carved new channels with his hands and the force of his will, and sent them rushing through the stables. The water did in a day what 30 years had left undone. He completed the labor through cleverness rather than strength, through looking at a problem from outside the problem, through the refusal to accept the terms he had been handed. But here's what I think the story is also saying, quietly, underneath the cleverness, that some of what we are asked to endure in this life is simply meant to break us. Some tasks are assigned by people who want to see us small, and the response to that, the real response, is not anger, not resistance, not even cleverness exactly. It is something more internal than any of those. It is the choice to move through the work without letting the smallness of the assignment diminish you. Heracles walked away from the stables clean. He had not become the filth he was sent to manage. There is a labor in that too, that has nothing to do with cattle. Near the end, he was sent somewhere most heroes do not return from. His 12th labor, the final one, the culminating task, was to descend into the underworld and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound who guarded the entrance to the realm of the dead, the creature who stood at the boundary between living and gone, who ensured that things only moved in one direction. To reach Cerberus, Heracles had to go all the way down. He had been initiated at Eleusis, those mysteries that the ancient world held in such reverence that even now we do not entirely know what was said or shown inside them. And this initiation was thought to offer protection in the lands below. He descended anyway, with or without it. He crossed the river Styx. He walked through the gray and whispering country of the dead, past the shades of those who no longer remembered what warmth felt like. He encountered the shade of Meleger, who wept, and Heracles promised to marry his living sister. He encountered Medusa, or her image, and his hand went to his sword before he understood. There are things below that can no longer harm you. The threat was real once, it is not real now. He released Theseus and Pirithous from where they had been trapped, small kindnesses on the way to the larger task. And then he asked Hades, the Lord of the Dead himself, seated in his dark palace, for permission to take the dog. Hades said, "If you can subdue the animal without weapons, you may take it." And Heracles wrestled Cerberus. The great hound bit through his shoulder, but Heracles held on with his bare hands, as he had held the serpents as a child, as he had held the Nemean Lion in the dark of the cave, and eventually the creature stilled. He brought the dog to the surface. He showed it, howling and three-headed and deeply unhappy, to a terrified Eurystheus. And then he took it back because that was the decent thing to do. He had gone to the land of the dead and come back. He had done what the soul does in its darkest passages, gone down into the place where everything is stripped away, where the self cannot hide behind its strength, or its name, or its story, and found that even there, at the very bottom, something essential remained, something that could still act, still choose, still hold on. This is why the ancients considered this labor the greatest, not because it was the most dangerous, but because it was the most truthful. Every other labor was done in the living world. Only this one required him to descend into what we all fear most and find out whether he survived it. He did, but he was changed by the going in ways that even he may not have been able to name. There was also the labor at the edge of the world, to obtain the golden apples of the Hesperides, those daughters of evening who tended a garden at the western rim of everything. He needed the help of Atlas. Atlas, the Titan who held the sky upon his shoulders as punishment for the ancient war against the gods, who had stood in that position for so long that the posture had become the man, or perhaps the man had ceased to exist and only the posture remained. Heracles found Atlas and proposed an exchange. He would hold the sky while Atlas fetched the apples. The Titan agreed, perhaps because he was desperate for even a moment of relief, perhaps because he thought the hero would not manage it. Heracles took the sky onto his own shoulders. Picture that. Picture what it means to hold the sky. The weight not of atmosphere alone, but of everything above you. Everything that is not Earth, the vast and indifferent overhead pressing down with the combined mass of all that exists above the human scale. Picture your legs bracing, your spine compressing, your understanding of your own limits stretching and not quite breaking. Atlas returned with the apples, and then he paused. He had not felt free in so long. He told Heracles he would take the apples to Eurystheus himself, but Heracles could simply keep holding the sky. Heracles agreed. He said, of course only, could Atlas hold it for just one more moment while he found something to pad his shoulders? Atlas took the sky back. Heracles took the apples and walked away. He had tricked the Titan. He had gotten what he needed. But underneath the cleverness, there's something else in this story. Something about the nature of what it means to take on a weight that was never meant for you and find that you can bear it. Not because you are comfortable, not because it is easy, but because bearing it is what the moment asked of you, and you did not refuse. There is also something about relief, about the way that burdens, when carried long enough, begin to feel permanent, the way that Atlas had perhaps forgotten that the sky was a weight that could be set down, could be given to someone else, even briefly. The hero arrived and showed him, by taking it himself, that the impossible burden was bearable, that it could be held by human hands as well as divine ones. Consider what each labor actually was. The lion, confronting invulnerability not by matching it, but by going inside it, by entering the dark, by using the threat's own nature as the solution. The stables, moving through degradation without being diminished by it. The underworld, going all the way down and returning, finding out what remains of you when everything is stripped away. The sky, bearing what was never meant to be yours, for as long as the bearing is necessary. None of these are simply physical tasks, or rather, they are physical tasks, but they are simultaneously something else. Each one asked something of him that went deeper than strength. Each one stripped away another layer of the man he had been before the grief. before the night in his own house, before the silence, before the ruins, and replaced it with something that could only be built through endurance. There is a way of thinking about the labors as punishment, 12 years of servitude, of impossible work, assigned by a frightened small king at the behest of a goddess who hated him. This is true as far as it goes. But there is another way of thinking about them. 12 years of being asked to do the impossible and discovering each time that he could. 12 years of the world saying here is a thing that cannot be done, and Heracles answering quietly with his hands, watch. 12 years of building something from the grief, layer by layer, task by task, until the structure of what he had become was unrecognizable as the man who had knelt in the ruins of his home and found no reason to move. He moved. He kept moving. And the moving, not the strength, not the divine blood, not the favor of the gods, the moving was what made him Heracles. He was given 301 tasks and was released from his service. He traveled and loved and made enemies and made allies and did not stop being himself. He married again, Deianira, who loved him with the particular ferocity of those who know what they have found is rare. They were happy in the way that happiness is always a little shadowed by the knowledge that it can be taken. There was a centaur named Nessus who tried to abduct Deianira, and Heracles killed him with an arrow dipped in the blood of the Hydra, a poison so old and complete that nothing survived it. As Nessus died, he told Deianira that his blood was a love charm, that if Heracles ever seemed to stray from her, she should anoint his shirt with it, and his love would return. She kept the vial. She hoped she would never need it. Years later, jealousy moved in her like a tide. She anointed the shirt, and Heracles put it on. The poison of the Hydra, the same poison he had used in his labors, the same darkness he had carried as a weapon for years, entered him not through battle, but through a mistake, through love misdirected, through the fear that lives inside devotion, and sometimes in its desperation reaches for the wrong thing. The pain was unlike anything he had known. He had wrestled the three-headed hound of the underworld. He had held the sky. And this burned in a way that had no outside, that he could not fight because it came from within, was beyond him. He understood what had happened. He did not blame Deianira, or if he did, the record of that pain was not what survived. What survived was the instruction he gave. He told his companions to build a pyre on Mount Oda. He climbed onto it himself. He spread his lion skin over the wood. He lay down. He asked for the fire. There is something very still in this moment. The man who had faced every impossible thing the world had offered, who had been tested from infancy, from the cradle with the serpents, through the madness, through the grief, through the 12 years of impossible labor, lay down at the end, not in battle, but in peace. He chose it. He walked toward the last thing with the same quality he had carried through everything else. Not bravado, but continuance. Not fearlessness, but the willingness to keep going, even when going leads to the end. The fire took the mortal half of him. Everything that was Alcmene's child, everything that ached, everything that had knelt in the ruins, everything that had been broken and rebuilt and broken again, it burned. And what remained was something else. A cloud descended from Olympus, and when it lifted, Heracles was gone. He was received among the immortals. He was reconciled, finally, with Hera, given her daughter Hebe as his divine wife, welcomed into the halls of a place that had been his by blood from the beginning, but that he had spent his entire life being kept from. He became a constellation. He became a god. The mortal half burned, the divine half rose. This is the apotheosis, the transformation, And we have heard it so many times that we sometimes forget how strange and radical it is. The idea that the mortal part of us is not the lesser part, that it is in fact the part that does the work, that the grief and the endurance and the getting back up and the carrying and the descending into the dark, all of that belongs to the mortal half. The divine half was there from the beginning, untested, unproven, waiting. It is the mortal part that builds the story. And so you arrive at the question that the story has always been asking, quietly, underneath all its monsters and its labors and its fire. What do you do after the worst thing? Heracles did not answer this question with wisdom. He answered it with movement. He walked toward Delphi, he walked toward Tiryns, he walked into caves and descended into underworlds and stood under a sky so heavy it should have broken him. And he kept walking, not because he was divine, not because the gods protected him. They manifestly did not. They gave him his labor and his curse and his grief, and left him largely to manage alone. He kept walking because the alternative was to stop, and stopping for him was not something his nature permitted. You may not be Heracles. Your labors may not involve lions or rivers or the hound of the underworld, but you know the feeling of standing at the edge of something impossible, of looking at a loss so large it reorganizes everything, of being handed a task so degrading or so heavy or so impossible that accepting it feels like a defeat. The story of Heracles does not say the task will become easy. It does not say the grief will heal into something painless. It does not say the skin you take away from the lion you've killed will protect you from every wound that follows. It won't. The poison still gets through in the end. What it says is this: strength is not something you have. It is something you discover in the process of carrying what you are asked to carry. It is something built in the dark, in the cave, in the underworld, in the 30-year accumulation that you walk through, not because you want to, but because the river is already flowing, because your hands are already moving, because the task is in front of you, and you are here. There is a reason people have told this story for 3,000 years. Not because it is comfortable, not because it reassures, but because it is honest about what life asks of the people who are given impossible things, and because it suggests, gently but persistently, that the bearing of those things is its own kind of transformation, that the pyre is not only an ending, that what survives the fire was always there, waiting to be seen. Rest now. You have nothing to carry tonight. Whatever labors wait for you will wait until morning. Whatever impossibilities have been assigned to you, by circumstance, by grief, by love, by the long accretion of everything you have been asked to bear, they are not here in this room. They are somewhere outside, in the world, patient and dormant as sleeping things. Here there is only the weight of your own body, which is enough. The slow tide of your breathing, which is enough. The quiet, which is neither empty nor full, but simply what it is. A space in which you do not have to be strong or clever or enduring. You do not have to hold the sky tonight. You have already walked a long way. You have already held more than you thought you could. The mortal half of you, the part that aches, the part that remembers, the part that has knelt in ruins and stood up again, that part deserves to be still for a little while. Let the story settle into you like sediment, slow and heavy and complete. Let Heracles go to his constellation, to his quiet place above the world. Let the labors rest. Let the lions sleep. Let the rivers find their own way home. You are here. That is all that is asked of you tonight, and that is enough. Good night.